Taoiseach, I'm going to try and move us on to some better news. We learned today in the Independent about a debt write-down done by AIB, where a Dublin family have had €150,000 written down and an amount more parked at 0% interest. Now, AIB, Taoiseach, should ultimately get the same amount of money back from the family, but thanks to this deal, rather than being evicted, the family will stay in their home, they'll own their home, they can raise their kids, get on with their lives, recover financially and contribute to the state. And AIB, I think, are to be congratulated for what they're doing, as too are the various organisations, Taoiseach, that help families in these situations. But in spite of the good news, Taoiseach, it's very clear that there's still very serious obstacles to be addressed. I spent the morning talking to various stakeholders involved in various parts of the mortgage crisis, and they said a variety of things. They talked about the lack of transparency. So, for example, many of the debt write-downs which have already happened have non-disclosures attached to them. They talked about inconsistency of approach between banks. As always, Bank of Ireland was mentioned by everyone I spoke with, and Taoiseach, to say that the language used by the people I spoke with to describe Bank of Ireland's behaviour was unparliamentary would be something of an understatement. They spoke, Taoiseach, about the lack of cooperation between the banks. One senior lender I spoke to told me that many of the deals that he tries to work on get torpedoed by Bank of Ireland, who even as a minority creditor won't cooperate with other banks when they're trying to find solutions. They talked about the red tape in the insolvency process. So to date there have been 46 protective certificates issued, 5 DSAs and 3 PIAs. Now, based on the costs of the insolvency service since they've begun taking applications, these come in at a cost to the state, Taoiseach, of about €65,000 each. So clearly a lot of work to be done. They talked about bureaucracy in other places as well. One lender in a bank told me that the requirements of compliance to CCMA 2 are now so severe and time-consuming that his team is no longer getting the time they need with the borrowers. So, Taoiseach, the current review of the ISI is welcome, but it's not enough. What we need is a system-wide review at this point that looks at all the parts of the system, talks to all of the stakeholders, the banks, the borrowers, the ISI, the credit unions and everybody else involved. And it can be done in a matter of weeks.
Deputy, put your question, please.
It would be very, very cheap, and it would provide, Taoiseach, invaluable information to Cabinet, to the Oireachtas and to the public. So can I ask you, in light of good news that we hear today, and in light of the very significant opportunities to address the bottlenecks, will you look at a system-wide review? Do you believe it's a good idea? And will you commission one that can report back to Cabinet, back to the Oireachtas in a few weeks? Thank you.
It is good news for the people involved here. I understand that the value of the house in question has been reduced seriously from what it was originally estimated at market value. Probably would be very difficult to sell it. In any event, it's a case-by-case analysis, Deputy Donnelly. That case this morning might not be replicated, in the particular circumstances with very many others. What you ask for is a system review. Now, the situation is that 85,000 have been restructured. 50% of those were restructured before they got into difficulties, so that banks or lending institutions were in a position to cut deals and to make deals with the people involved. Obviously, everybody understands that at the end of the day, house repossession is a very traumatic thing and should only be seen as a very last resort. So the targets that are set for the banks, Deputy Donnelly, are being monitored by the Department of Finance, are being monitored by the Central Bank, and obviously that information comes to the Cabinet Subcommittee dealing with credit access and credit review. So it's not as if you set them up, either the Insolvency Agency or the arrangements made between the banks and the Mortgage Holders Association or whatever. It is being monitored constantly. So I don't actually see a need for a set-up to have a system review here. The system has to operate on a case-by-case basis, because every case is different in some way or other, depending on the circumstances and the people involved. So believe me when I say to you that we want this sorted out, and the Minister for Finance has made it clear on more than one occasion that the significant numbers of people who still have mortgage distress hanging around their necks, we need to have that pressure released on those people so that they can contribute to the economy and contribute to society and for their own family well-being as well. So I don't actually think, Deputy Donnelly, that there's a need for setting up a review body of the entire system now. It is being monitored from Central Bank and from the Department of Finance on a very regular basis. And the important thing here is that the banks be required to meet the targets that have been set for them, and that is that by the end of this year, that every person in distress here is offered a sustainable solution. And I don't just mean give them, interest-only repayments. We've got to have deals cut here that the borrower can adhere to and have a future, and that will stand up. So perhaps if you were to raise this question, in a couple of months' time, let's say before the summer break of the House here, we could give you a full report, or it could be discussed at the Oireachtas Committee on what the state of play is insofar as capacity to monitor the targets that have been set for banks to do deals with mortgage holders who have a problem.
Thank you. Sorry, would you stay quiet, Deputy, please? Deputy Donnelly, thank you.
Thanks for your reply, Taoiseach.
Deputy Donnelly, please, thank you. Well, Deputy Donnelly, would you please proceed, Deputy? Deputy, would you mind stop interrupting the House? Deputy Donnelly, thank you.
Thanks for your reply, Taoiseach. Don't be fooled by the targets that are coming in. We heard from the Finance Committee that the majority of targets that have come in so far are legal letters initiating repossession proceedings. The problem, Taoiseach, is this. There's still about 180,000 mortgages in arrears. That's about 1 in 5. Now, Ireland has more mortgages in arrears by several times than the next closest country on earth. So what's happened in Ireland isn't happening anywhere else. And whilst there are targets in place, and whilst the ISI is in place, and there is a review to try and get rid of some of the red tape there, nobody's joining the dots. We have a complicated system with lots of different stakeholders. The central bank, some of the bankers will say, are part of the problem based on some of the things they're doing. The central bank will say the opposite. You've got lots of different stakeholders, you've got a complicated system, and nobody's joining the dots. So what the central bank is monitoring is, are the banks hitting the targets? But hitting those targets is just one bit. I've just outlined 5 separate areas that have come from a multitude of stakeholders.
Question, please.
They're saying there isn't any transparency in what's going on. There's complete inconsistency, Taoiseach, between the banks, with Bank of Ireland being a notable outlier. There isn't cooperation between the banks. They talked about too much red tape in the insolvency process and too much red tape in other parts like CCMA 2. Therefore, Taoiseach, a system-wide review. We're not talking about a big, expensive review here. We're talking about a review of a few weeks, probably run by 2 or 3 people, that brings the stakeholders together and identifies bits and joins up the dots in a way that isn't happening. The people who are on the ground doing this every day are saying that that sort of review that would systematically identify the problems in the system would be hugely beneficial. So, Taoiseach, can I ask you this? On the basis that it would cost very little money, on the basis that it would be incredibly valuable information for us in the Oireachtas and for you in Cabinet to have, and on the basis that the social problem associated with it is so big...
Sorry, would you put your question, please? You're way over the time.
Is it not reasonable that you would conduct a short, sharp review to get us this information? Thank you.
Taoiseach.
Well, as I said to you, in the case that was public knowledge today, which is good news for the borrowers in that case, there is a capacity to meet repayments on a smaller amount, and obviously the settlement that was arrived at with AIB has made that perfectly clear. Now, it's not just a case of the Central Bank or the Department of Finance setting targets for banks, Deputy Donnelly. It's not just a case of monitoring what's happening. It is a case of auditing the deals that are being done to see whether they're sustainable and whether they stand up or not. So, I mean, from one point of view, your request is it's a reasonable request. It's not about having a cost in doing it, but my point is that it's already being done. both by the Central Bank and by the Department of Finance. And what I'd suggest to you, in fairness to you in asking your question, let's say we come back, this is March, let's say we come back here towards the end of May or early June, and we have a discussion about it here in the House on the basis of the monitored and audited reports, both of the Central Bank to that point and the Department of Finance, and let's see what's happening.
Thank you.
So if there are conclusions or recommendations that might come from that as to how the thing might have to be tweaked a little bit to make it more effective, then we're all for that. Our interest genuinely, Deputy Donnelly, is to see that people have these pressures relieved from them. They get back into contributing to our economy and to our country, and that requires the banks to meet their targets, that not only that they be monitored, but that they be audited to see that they stand up. So I'd be happy to share that up-to-date information, let's say at that point, with the House.
Thank you.